understand this gospel passage better, the healing that Jesus did, one is to understand a bit about the town of Capernaum. Capernaum is on the Sea of Galilee, on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, in the province of Galilee. So that would be north of Jerusalem. There's a synagogue in that town that dates back to Roman times. In fact, it's this synagogue that's pictured on the screen. That isn't the oldest synagogue. Actually, there's a church, the remains of a church there. And there is a synagogue, and then under this synagogue are the ruins of another synagogue that was there before, was built upon. This actual synagogue dates from about 300 or 400 years after Christ. The town of Capernaum, as I said, was along the Sea of Galilee. It was a fishing town. There's a lot of basalt rock, so the houses are made of rock, or were made of rock. It would have looked something like this back in the time of Jesus. This was the town where the Apostle Peter lived, where his extended family was located. In fact, the little church that's there is a very ancient church, probably from a couple hundred years after the time of Christ, is built on top of the ruins of the house that belonged to Peter. This was a town where Jesus was very familiar. They knew him. He also knew this town. So this is one that he came back to very often. He was welcomed in the homes. It was one of these homes, in fact Peter's, where such a crowd gathered that somebody that wanted to be healed, they actually tore open one of these roofs and let him down there in the living room where Jesus was sitting so that he would be healed. That all happened in this little village of Capernaum. And yet today it is quite a tourist site. There's a church quite close to the synagogue that was on the first picture. It's a fairly modern church, but in the very center of this church, I believe this is a Franciscan church, but in the very center, you see there's a railing, and down underneath that, so it would be the level underneath that, there's a glass cover, and that covers the ruins of the old church, which was built on top of the house of the Apostle Peter. A very ancient town, and a town where Jesus was known to come. In fact, this is an aerial photo. You can see to the left is that modern church building. To the right is the synagogue. And we're told that a Roman centurion had actually built, not that synagogue, but the first synagogue. A Roman centurion, just to understand a bit more of this story, he was called a centurion, century being 100, because he was a Roman army officer over 100 men. He was an important officer. And being the military leader of 100 men, if you can imagine if you were out on the battlefield and you were wearing a metal hat with a big red plume on it, where would that put you? I'll tell you what, you would have to either lead or run. And quite often these centurions, they were out in front of 100 fighting men, some of the best fighting men of their age. And they were highly visible from far off as to which one the leader was. So when they led their men into battle, quite often that is exactly what they did. They led them into battle. And their men rallied around them. This was a man who had come to be quite beloved in this rural area of Galilee because he honored the Jewish people. In fact, he had built with his own money the first synagogue where they would have had worship underneath the ruins of this ruined synagogue. In itself, close to 1,800 years old. So this Roman centurion was an important man, and he was an important man in this village of Capernaum and its surrounding area. Now, that said, I want you to stop and think. At that time, I think it holds over to this time, there is a commonly held misconception about God, a commonly held view of God, which says, in other words, I get from God what I do. The idea is sort of that if I keep up my side of the payments and do the things that a good person should do, well, God will have my back. It's sort of like God owes it to me. Now, there's some ways that works out in everyday life. For one, it's the idea that I do a certain number of good things. I make good moral choices. I do good moral things. And somehow, God will have my back. I remember learning this as a kid. In our home, my dad didn't go to church. He was a highly honest person, but he didn't go to church. He let all the rest of us go to church for him. And he would say, in other words, when you get to the end of your life, God weighs all the good things against all the bad things you've done. If you've done more good things than bad things, if you've been a really good person, well, you're in. You're in heaven. I asked him once, well, who gets to judge whether they're good or bad? He didn't like that. See, because often we then become the judge. We then earn our way into heaven. We earn our way into God. In fact, God sort of owes us. But another idea that comes out of that is you do God a favor by being a good person, and God does a favor back by looking out for you. And God will pay you back in good things. Now that's a wonderful philosophy until you get to the fact that often bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. But also, at times, bad things happen to good people. So if your whole philosophy is, I do all of these good things so that I'm going to get back from God, well, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But there's that misconception. Also, maybe there's that conception or that perception with this that people deserve good, and some deserve bad. Some deserve good things to happen to them, some deserve evil. It's that idea that there's a spiritual cause and effect to everything. You do one thing, and either good things are going to happen to you, or you do this thing, and only bad things are going to happen to you. But there's a problem with that. And that is that God is much greater than cause and effect. God is much greater than what we can perceive for doing right, or we can perceive on judging each situation. See, sooner or later, our logic, when we're trying to whittle God down to our size, our logic falls apart. Now, there's another thing that sort of gets involved in this too, and that's if you're the kind of person that believes that if you're a certain ethnic group, or you belong to a certain denomination, well, then you've got a leg up on the rest, because somehow, that's higher priority for God and higher, sort of higher in God's sight. I have to laugh. I went to the funeral of a friend of ours, father, and it was held at First Covenant Church. First Covenant Church is that huge church in Minneapolis, right next to the Metrodome. In fact, I don't know what they're going to do when they lose the fact that they can sell parking places with all these new parking rates. But they sell parking places, and it's a big church. And being covenant, that means it was Swedish. And I had to laugh because the family of this gentleman said, when we were younger, we just knew that God really, really, really loved us. Because for one, we were covenant church. And second, even better, we were Swedish. That's a joke. Okay. And they said all of a sudden this rude wake up to find that God has a lot of love for a lot of people, whether they're a part of a church or not part of a church. He said that some of those early misconceptions, that somehow we do these things and then God is pleased and God pays us back. Do you get the drift with some of these? You see a pattern? That pattern is my assumption that I've got God figured out, and if I do a certain set number of things, or if I belong to the right organization, or if I'm the right ethnic, somehow God is going to be pleased enough that He's going to have my back and I'm going to have only good things happen to me. And what that does is it whittles God down into a smaller size that can just fit to my brain, and it frankly just doesn't work. So here's the story. Jesus comes into this village of Capernaum, a place where He's been many, many times. He is well known. He has finished a lot of teaching, and as He comes into town, He's got hundreds of people with Him, following Him. And as He walks into town, the Jewish leaders of the town approach Him. And they say, "We've got a favor." Now, they were in a little bit of a hard place because they were the Jewish leaders and they hadn't really fully endorsed Jesus yet. But yet this man who really was their benefactor asks them for a favor. So they approach Jesus, and in their mind and thinking, we're going to ask a favor for a Roman centurion. Now surely Jesus will say no, because after all, this guy isn't the right ethnic group. He doesn't believe all the right things. He's not doing as many good things as we are. So they go to Jesus and they say, "We want you to know this man deserves to be helped out by Him. He deserves to have his prayers answered. He deserves to have his servant healed." Well, why does He deserve it? Well, He loves our people. He's kind to us. And He even built us a church or a synagogue. Surely that must count for something in their thinking. Surely that must count for something. So come heal His servant. So Jesus surprises them and just says, "Show me the way." And He starts out for the centurion's house. Now understand this, in Jewish culture at the time, a very religious person didn't go inside the house of someone who wasn't Jewish. It would sully them or contaminate them. And so Jesus is heading off from this centurion's home. Likely these religious leaders didn't go to his home. They would go to his work or he was on his way to the centurion's home when the centurion sends some other friends to him and says, please, don't contaminate yourself by coming into my house. I am not worthy to have you come into my house. And then he explains why he called a favor on the religious leaders. He said, I didn't even feel worthy to go and ask you myself. So I sent someone else to ask you. I'm really not worthy of this, but I love this servant. Please heal him. Just speak the word and he'll be healed. He even adds that, you don't even have to come. I know that you're a person of authority. All you have to do is say the word and it will happen. He'll be healed. Jesus turns around and says about this centurion something he never said about any Jewish person. He said it about a few people, but he looked around at his disciples and the crowd that was following him and said, what wonderful faith! I have not seen such faith in all of Israel. He says this about a person who isn't even Jewish. I've never seen such faith. Well, I want to say that there were two approaches to God in this passage. One is, I deserve something from God. I paid my dues, and now I get my dues. That was one idea of a way to approach God. And then there's the centurion's approach, this second approach. The centurion truly said, I deserve nothing from God. But I understand God to be just. I understand God to be full of mercy, full of graciousness. Hopefully, he'll look upon me with favor and not give me what I really do. God doesn't owe me anything. Oh, that God would be merciful to me and give me what I don't deserve. I don't want what I deserve. See, two very different approaches. One thinks he, she deserves, and they're going to get their due, and the other says, I know I don't deserve it. What I do deserve, I don't want. Punishment, separation from God. But God is merciful and loving. Hopefully he will look on me with favor and not give me what I'm due. Give more. Two totally different approaches to God. So to ask, which approach did the Jewish leaders take? I think the Jewish leaders took what most of us naturally come to in our lives. That somehow God maybe owes me. I remember a friend that was in a terrible car accident. And terribly devastating to his family. And one of the first questions he asked, and I think this is natural for many people to ask, was, God, why did you let this happen? I go to church. I give. I even volunteer sometimes. Why would you let this happen? Okay, what is that? Sort of asking, God, you owe me better than you owe me better than this. Friends, God does not owe us. The Jewish leaders took that approach. They figured that they were owed, that they had done enough good things for God, and they were trying to convince Jesus that, well, this Roman centurion had done enough good things too. But which approach did the centurion take? That centurion never even went out to meet Jesus. He felt himself not worthy of that. And Jesus marvels, how great is his faith. Well, friends, I want to invite you this morning as we take communion to let the centurion lead you this morning in your approach to God as we receive this gracious gift of Holy Communion. This gift which celebrates the fact that God wants to have a relationship with us, not because we deserve it. Quite the contrary. You don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. He wants to have a relationship with us because he loves us. And thankfully today, we take this communion symbolizing we get what we don't deserve. The gracious forgiveness of God. The gracious acceptance of God. Not because we've earned it, not because we're paying our dues, but because he's forgiving us and accepting us and holding himself out to us. You are no more worthy of this than I am. There is no way we could ever deserve God's help or his forgiveness. There's no way we could ever deserve a relationship with God. There is no way we could ever deserve to have our prayers answered. Yet you desire this, and so do I, that we would be friends with God. So let communion this morning be an expression of surrender to Jesus that says, I come to you this morning, and as you kneel here, as you stand here, as you take the elements, receive them as a gift you could never deserve. What did the Jewish leaders say? This man deserves this. He's done a lot of good things. Well, let this centurion lead us this morning to say, there is nothing we could have done to deserve this wonderful gift that we are given. Forgiveness, new life in Jesus, answers to prayer, a relationship with God, peace in our troubled time, in our troubled lives. Amen.